So I'm going to say very bold claim, and I'm not sure how many will agree with this opinion, but that's the fun thing about opinions. Gridman is actually my favorite Studio Trigger production that they've ever done. Up till now, that title has been held by Kill la Kill, but I really like Gridman that much. Episode 12 hit it out of the park and did pretty much everything that I was hoping for in terms of tying up loose ends, leaving it very conclusive. Of course, you could always do more Gridman stories with a different set of characters that Gridman interacts with, but in terms of Yuta's world, or this kind of fictional world that Akane created, that story is done. But I really like how perfectly wrapped up this is. I love how much it did and how this is a series that is technically a sequel to the live action, but it can be viewed completely separately by those who have never seen the Gridman live action series. I love how everything about this functioned. I love how they brought back the original Gridman design from the live action series. Hell, they even brought back the original Gridman soundtrack for a moment when this design is revealed. I love how we see Akane waking up in the real world. That is the perfect way to wrap it up, and I love how they kind of played around with the idea of gods in their worlds and how gods shouldn't live in their own created worlds. Gridman comes from his own separate world, Akane lived in the real world, and I just love how everything kind of came full circle, because really the idea of gods interacting with their creations, the only time I can really think of anime that did that was recreators, and the whole idea of, like manga authors, anime creators kind of interacting with their creations when they're brought into the real world. I just love that type of concept, and having Akane and kind of the characters be self-aware of their god, that's something that's really interesting, and I love how they kind of played with it in the final stretch of this anime. But I really think Akane waking up in the real world was like the perfect bow to wrap everything up, because that's what she needed to do. She was in this fictional world that Alexis kind of manipulated her horrible feelings because she was trying to run away from her original fears and anxiety and her own troubles with the real people in her world, and now she's waking up and finally is ready to confront them and actually start living her life, not trap herself away in a fictional utopia that was really a fictional hell. I love that, and I love how this kind of created world can actually grow and develop without the fear of anything horrible happening. I love how Utsumi got a little bit of a redemption. I thought they were going to leave him hanging all depressed, but they kind of gave him a pick-me-up. Sure, you might be able to look at Utsumi and say, hey, what did he really add to the group here? Like, he didn't actually fight, he didn't do anything, but he was kind of the lore guy. He gave them the knowledge on the kaiju and how to apply it, but also they were friends and they stuck together, so I do like his little redemption. It was enough. I mean, sure, people might be able to look at a character like Utsumi. Hell, you might even be able to look at a character like Rika and say there was no real character development, but that was kind of the point, because this was a created world by Akane to fit her ideals, and how basically this was supposed to play exactly as she wanted, because in the real world, clearly she couldn't have that. And I love how, because she wasn't so perfect as a god, she actually had to create kaiju in order to keep the peace. That was a really nice touch. Everything about this episode I feel really, really happy with. The only thing I could say that maybe they didn't flesh out as much as I would have liked would be the Yuta and Rika connection, because clearly Yuta liked Rika, but I think they could have done a lot more with that instead of just like the 30-second kind of wink and a nudge to the viewer on why Yuta was so attached to her. Like, I think they could have done a lot more there, but past that, I feel like this was conclusive. Like, they wrapped up the Gridman story. Best of all, the thing I was hoping for the most since very early on into this series was my boy Auntie getting a happy ending, and my boy got a happy ending. Hell, he even got another eye back. That's all I could ask for. If everything else in this episode sucked, I'd be happy just for that moment. And I do like that girl who originally was introduced very creepy and kind of had a sweet conclusion at the end of this episode. She even connects back to the original Gridman series. Someone was pointing out how I believe her family or something along that nature actually helped Gridman in the live action, so it was kind of nice how they tied it to this anime. Sure, if you never watched the live action, you may not totally understand where she came from, but because you have a world full of kaiju, it's not that big of a deal. That's kind of what I like about the show, is how it connects so perfectly, because it technically, I guess, can count as a sequel to the live action, but at the same time, it stands tall by itself, but it has all these winks and a nudge to past Gridman episodes and parts in the live action. It's really nice to think about. The only stuff I know about the live action is from what I've read on wiki pages, what people have told me, and also the only reason I know that the original soundtrack was in this episode is because I actually listened to the live action soundtrack like 2 weeks ago, give or take, when I was working on a Gridman video that's going to go out in a few weeks. So that's the only reason I know that. And also because when I've watched just trailers for the original Gridman series, and I have seen a couple of fights, I know what the original design looks like. But this episode was really fun. I like how, to no surprise, they cut out the opening, they cut out the credits, but I like how this fight just felt so different. The kaiju that Akane was creepy and disturbing. It almost kind of looked like something pulled right out of hell. And I love how when Alexis does merge with her, it becomes this immortal being, and the only way to stop it is by mending Akane's heart. It's not a physical destruction that it needs because he can just keep repairing himself again and again. It's mending her heart because that's what this entire show is about. The reason all the character development went into Akane is because Akane was the entire point of this. This was a fictional world that she made. These were her creations set to follow a set ideas and beliefs. That's all that was supposed to happen, but because things went wrong and because she was being manipulated by Alexis, I like how the entire point was for her to not hide away anymore in this fictional world, but tackle her real issues and fears head on in her own world and leave this world to grow and develop without the god kind of tinkering around with everything in everyone's lives. It's up to the actual people to fix their issues themselves, not rely on a god, which I just like how it kind of, it's this idea of religion and how it was applied, because if you look at how religion is used in the real world, it almost is really interesting how they applied it to here. Just this time you actually do get to see the god, and then the god leaves, and it's up to humans to deal with death, disease, and things like that, which was a really nice touch overall. When it came to the actual fight and just how it looked, I loved everything. The designs, the hand-drawn, the CG, like everything about it. It was exciting. There was explosions, there was destruction. It felt like this was the end for this world, and that restore beam I thought was a really nice touch because it didn't really feel like it came out of nowhere, because the entire point was that Yuta and Gridman were kind of merged together, so he wasn't at full strength. So him discovering this secret ability and his true purpose in this world, it didn't feel like a random power-up, but more of he finally awakened and understood his true potential. So Trigger really did avoid a really big hurdle that a lot of anime similar to it have, where it's like, oh, he got a power-up, of course he got a power-up in the final battle. No, it was he understood his full potential because he's finally awoken, and the actual Yuta kind of waking up at the end, it feels like there's enough so the viewer can piece together the final bits here or there with their own imagination, but it feels very conclusive and tied up. This is everything that I was hoping for. Music always got me hyped. I loved all the openings, especially when the opening would play when it was in those action scenes. You felt like a kid on Saturday morning watching your favorite show, but this time that favorite show not only had that classic tokusatsu action, but it was backed by a really anime designed story that was very exciting, but it also tied into the original live action Gridman. It kind of brought together a bunch of fans who normally wouldn't interact with one another, or maybe a very small group of fans who kind of felt isolated now kind of joined together with this other group, and it was just amazing to watch. At the beginning of the season, it wasn't that popular of a show. I remember when I first started doing reviews, it wasn't that something that people were really searching out, but by the time the show really got going with Akane and this overall story, it really developed into one of the most popular anime of the season, and that's not an easy feat with a season that's so stacked by sequels, new ideas that are also good in their own way. This was an amazing show. It's definitely one I'm going to remember for seasons to come. Easily my favorite Trigger production. I really liked it that much. Let me know whatever you thought of the final episode of Gridman down in the comment section below. Your favorite moment, whatever you're feeling, let me know, and be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, and also hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content from me in the future. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.